Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. Now, I do have to apologize about the delay, but I was just too traumatized by Tuesday night to do an episode until now because democracy has fallen, hate has won. The American people have failed Kamala Harris and her campaign. It was a flawless campaign, but they just would not take to it.
Flawless.
Flawless, okay? The strength
Never
that
forget
only
flawless.
strength that only a black woman could express. And we're in for dark times because uh, the felon won. The American people chose a felon over a qualified black woman, which is just shameful to me. But I suppose we have more important news to cover for the time being.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into the election, of course, because that too is very important news. Lots of speculation on how will that affect or not affect the war in Ukraine and the various wars that Israel is conducting in the Middle East. So,
Yeah, some interesting statements from Trump already, and it hasn't even been a week since the elections. But we'll get into all of that. But
yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, we have a lot of Ukraine to pick through first.
Okay, so I guess we can start with the overall map. Um, th- there are other fronts that are kind of hot right now, but I don't have really good, reliable maps. Weep Union this morning has not released a video, which he usually does, like in the wee hours, like 3 a.m. He'll have a video. Of course, he's 6 hours ahead, right? So for him, it's 9 a.m. Anyways, so there isn't one for November the 11th. I have checked other maps and I have watched several of Dima's videos from Military Summary Channel. And he does not have like, the kind of fully reliable mapping. So just to say, there is a lot of fighting going in Kursk. Um, from what I'm seeing, the extra units that the Ukrainians brought in, like the 80th, like the 47th, like the 79th, like they are stopping the Russians have some strongholds that they have captured, like Darina in the west and other areas. However, there's a total fog of war here. I'm not seeing any maps, and this is like 3 days running. For instance, there were two settlements that were captured in the Kharkov region by the Russians. I don't have a map. So I like unless there's a map, I'm not going to show it. Um, but in any case, let's start where there are maps and where arguably some of the most intense fighting is coming from, and that is in the Kurakhove or southern Pokrovsk region. That's the next slide after the overall map. And you're going to see basically Kurakhove is the town immediately beneath that large water reservoir that you see in the on the right side of the frame towards the right bottom hand corner. The Russians have entered Kurakhove in through the outskirts. Um, Kurakhove in and of itself is an interesting town. First of all, it will not be easy. We discussed this on the last show. It has major fortifications from the south. There is also a ring of villages to its northwest flank. And as you can see, there's a pocket that's forming. Again, there are reports that the Russians have made more progress in the area, cutting off the pocket. Ukrainians have blown up at least one, if not two, bridges in Karakhove that link it with Nova Ilinka to the north of it on the other side of the water reservoir. Um, I can't fully confirm this, but at least one, if not two, bridges have been destroyed. So that is probably a sign that the Ukrainians eventually might pull out. But you know that they're not going to pull out very quickly. Um, and the reason these pockets always form is to delay them leaving, right? And to inflict as many casualties on the I mean, they do inflict a lot of casualties on themselves. Don't get me wrong, um, if I can just go a little bit off tangent here, um, there was a pretty good video, rather long one, about 48 minutes long, but worth it, from History Legends that basically talked about the battle for Kurakhove, Pokrovsk, and that whole region of the Donetsk that they're fighting in right now. And you know, uh, there's some interesting news. If you remember, I by the way, I made a mistake. The Russians captured Ugledar on the 1st of October, not on the 31st of October. My mistake. And of course, that has led to this push of hundreds of kilometers north of Ugledar from a western line and up. And we've shown those gains. We'll see a little bit of that later. But um, as it turns out, like I mentioned that the commander that was responsible for protecting that for Ugledar, so it looks like that his brigade was depleted. Of 300 men, he said he had 30 left. 12 of the 30 were like cooks and administration staff. And he did, to his credit, History Legend did do a video on how hard it was for being an American GI during the Second World War in the European theater, because they actually did the same thing. They had large losses, and particularly in the Battle of the Bulge, we talked when Gio was on the show, just how massive those losses were, and how I mean, I do not want to minimize the size of this current war that we're in, and there really isn't anything comparable in Europe to it, unless you go to the Second World War. But I was merely trying to point out that the magnitude compared to it's still not like it's not even in the same ballpark. Like, however, these points are illustrative to just how grueling this is. So this commander, which I said on several shows that he had committed suicide, what History Legend is saying is that after various generals visited his office, he was then found dead. So, did he commit suicide? Was he coerced into it? Did they threaten him with something? Was what they said that drove him over the edge, or did they kill him? Right. So, I thought that was a very interesting bit of news. And of course, History Legend, he takes time making these videos. Sometimes it takes a month for him to do. And so there's lots of stories that you remember seeing that you can't quite include in a weekly episode because, you're dealing with so many other subjects. But he just devotes that one time to this one theater of the front. And, you just see how grueling it has been for both sides. So I thought that was interesting. Now, just to briefly return to the news from Kursk, is there's been another exchange of soldiers, dead soldiers, for each side. So the Russians received 37 dead soldiers. The Ukrainians received, I believe, something like well over 550, like 587, 576, 567, something. I can't remember the numbers exactly. However, about 60 of those that were returned, I don't know if people remember, but back in January 2024, there was an Ilyushin 76 plane that was downed by a Patriot missile. And it was a Russian plane that was carrying Ukrainian POWs to be exchanged.
Yes, that was.
Do you remember that?
I do. I think that was that before the summer. I know it was earlier
It
this
was
year.
it was like January 24th or something. I remember it was in
Yes.
the winter. There was snow on the ground. It was just one of the guys had appeared on television about how excited he was to see his wife and family again, his kids. Like, it's heart rendering. This whole war is heart rendering. So um, so part of that 500, let's say 70 exchange, about 60 of them were from January. I guess their bodies have been frozen for all that time. I don't know why it took so long. for this exchange. But again, you see um, astronomical differences in the amount of dead bodies being exchanged. 5 to 1, 6 to 1, more like 6 to 1 this time. However, the guys at Russians with Attitude, they think that the numbers of actual dead are actually far lower for both sides, and that both sides probably have roughly around the same number of dead. And that is what they said today in their most recent post on Telegram. However, they didn't expand on. In the past, they have said that they think the ratio is in Russia's favor, but it's probably only 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. I know. I mean, we've always hesitated because no one gives you the straight facts, and these things will take years. Um, for some of the truth, even then, numbers will be exaggerated. You're still going to need some amount of revisionist history later on as things go. You know what I mean? Like, there's lots of events where 10 years later, more new evidence emerges, or maybe it's fabricated, right? It's just hard to know. In any case, so let's return to the Frontline news. I just thought it was interesting to get some of that out of the way. It's just shocking that I guess Ugladar fell because they just. And by the way, they were what really probably broke this guy, this commander, okay, is that the 110th. Remember, the 110th was responsible for holding on to Ochertina,
Yes.
and a lot of them were captured, like between 800 to 900 were captured in Avdiivka. Okay, I don't know if people remember that, but when the Russians took Avdiivka in February this year. So what they did is they asked him to go back and retake or take a stronghold on the outskirts of Ugladar, and he refused. I wonder, I mean, that is just, it's suicide. Like they're basically asking him to go kill himself, right? So crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. Um, but, an important thing that, George Semioli said from the gaggle of about a week or two ago. He said, a lot of people talk about, and remember, he's pro-Russia. Don't get him wrong. But I've maintained this for quite a while. When people say, when is the collapse going to come? When is it going to come? I don't know. It's not 2022 anymore, and I talk about other people who talk about that, but it's not really. It doesn't necessarily reflect my opinion. And he said, as long as money keeps pouring in, like they're still resisting, progress is generally still slow, right? Um, so you should take that into account. But
And even
I
with how
would,
desperate the mobilization drives have gotten, they can still muster the manpower. Now, the
yeah,
casualty rates, once again, you can call those in the question. How well they're trained, you can call that in the question. But point being is, uh, by one mean or another, they still are holding the front line, and they still have the resources to do so. And that
yeah,
it probably would take a severe cut in funding for them to collapse in on themselves.
yeah.
And we'll see
Like
what
it is,
happens.
it is coming at a great cost, as you say. Like it's not like it will be finite. We're saying that day is coming. I guess what we're trying to do is sort of monitor people who say, yeah, it's 6 months. Or I mean, I don't know a lot of them. I certainly don't subscribe to people who, but you do get that, right? I'm sorry to
No, no,
cut you
go
off
ahead.
there. Go ahead. No, no, I'm done.
That's all I had to say on that note. But they will hold out in really until the money runs dry. Of course, there is a manpower crisis. There is a recruitment crisis in Ukraine, but they
Yeah,
still
you
do man.
messaged me
Yeah, they
about that. Go ahead.
yeah, and they still do manage to get the bodies that they need. In some cases, quite literally, the bodies as well. But I'll find that exact message
I
I was
think
referring.
they're 20% below what they expected to gather. Because remember, they're building up like for another front next year,
Yes,
and what are they saying? They're like
um, but
they have big issues with desertion.
yes, that's what I was going to bring up. So this is according to the Economist, which is very pro-Ukraine. Don't get me wrong. Probably one of the most
Hmm.
pro-Ukraine outlets out there.
And pro Kamala Harris.
Oh yeah, extremely. Pretty much everything you'd expect from a left-wing establishment, even as all of the other media sources, all of the other big, I suppose, power players, you could say, either tacitly went towards Trump or just stayed their hand and stayed neutral. The Economist was all in for Harris, so they actually stuck out in that regard. But they had reported that there's been about a 20% desertion rate from the AFU uh,
Mm.
since the beginning of the war, and that they still have yet to make up those numbers. And I know that we've gone over the desertion figures before, but they are increasing, and 20% is probably the highest figure I've heard for it overall. But I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if it is higher. And of course, there is, much like what happened in Afghanistan, motivation for these desertions, these casualties actually not to be reported. Because the
Yes.
commanders, they still get the money, they still get the funds for the troops that are allegedly under their command, which, I mean, of course there's going to be a huge embezzlement problem. That's just, uh, that's always going to happen, especially in a case of a war like Ukraine. But I would say maybe a few percentage points higher on that desertion rate, but uh, it is becoming a manpower crisis. Like I said, they still have enough to hold the line at great cost, but the question is how many mobilization drives can they do until it falls in, and will they run out of money or will they run out of men first? And I know if you watch the news coming out of particularly the Moldova-Ukraine border, the Romania-Ukraine border, not so much Poland or Slovakia or even Hungary for that matter, but particularly that southwestern portion of Ukraine where it borders both Moldova and Romania, you have thousands of at least attempted border crossings. It just seems coming out every
Oh
month.
yeah.
And there's actually, I can't remember his name, but there's one guy who documented his entire desertion. Well, actually, not desertion, but fleeing the country because he was never conscripted
Yeah, yeah.
on Twitter. It was a fascinating story talking about how he had to hike through southwestern Ukraine to get to the Romanian border, and I think is somewhere in Europe today. But fascinating stuff. It's actually all in, funny enough, Russian, so you would have to translate it if you don't speak it. But I mean, it's not just that guy. There's countless stories like that, and that will
Yeah.
continue, especially as the fighting intensifies. If we do see the Russian push that a lot of people are expecting, that is further going to break the morale. And it is just slowly bleeding Ukraine dry. That's not to say that Russia isn't paying any price for this, but I think when it comes to the war of attrition, it's not controversial to say, it's not even a unique take on my part, that the Ukrainians are bleeding at a much faster rate than the Russians probably realistically can,
Yeah.
barring some sort of massive Western intervention. Now, I know that, especially in the light of Trump's victory, the EU has been throwing around all sorts of quote unquote peace plans and proposals, which we'll get into, don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
But the the state of morale when it comes to the manpower in these wars, yes, artillery is important, yes, everything else is important, but
You
fundamentally,
can tell 2024 is tangibly different than 2023 and extremely different
oh,
for 2022.
certainly, that's no question about that. But once again, the infantry is quite literally the backbone of these forces, and if they don't have the men to hold the line, or if you see especially what they were doing in the Kharkov region earlier in the year, where the men are holding the line who aren't very well equipped, so it's more or less just a meat shield. Not necessarily a meat wave, but a meat shield in order to halt Russian advances, at least in that part of the front. Uh, and look, it's been successful. It's been a severe cost, but it has been successful in terms of slowing Russia's advance in that part of the front. But
Hmm.
this is what they've been forced to resort to. It is a meat grinding war. Of course, Zelensky doesn't want to sue for peace, but it is at the point where even if they are able to halt some sort of Russian advance, even if they are able to achieve their maximalist goals, it's been said many times before, and I think it bears repeating. Ukraine will simply be a dysfunctional country after the war with no prospects for anyone, especially once that border opens, once this quote unquote state of emergency ends. More and more people are going to leave because you already have, like I said, the thousands of men who are of quote unquote military age who tried to flee the country. When you lift those restrictions and you let them leave legally, they are going to pour out in mass numbers. We saw this after the Maidan. They poured out in massive numbers. From 2014 to 2022, there was about a million people leaving Ukraine every year. and that number
Yeah.
has only exponentially increased as a result of the war. And post-war might be controversial to say. It might sound strange, but I do think it would dwarf both post-Maidan and
Oh
during
yeah.
the war numbers.
Yeah. So if we could, all great points, and we'll expand on those points as we wrap up the frontline news. Um, so just returning, we have the overall map. I've got the villages outlined. The big village, of course, is Andreevka, heavily fortified from the north, um, several layers, and then you can see the village next to it, Shevchenko, which is to the east, and east of that is Stary Terny, which is just south of uh, Sontsevka. So Sontsevka is a village that the Russians have a foothold in. They've captured, I think, roughly around 25-30% of it. The next slide will show you that capture. This is what they did, I believe, on Sunday, Sunday or Saturday. So yeah, Sontsevka, if you want to get to it.
Yeah, I have that one
I,
up
I,
now.
I because oh, you do. Okay, sorry, I can't see. So uh, this is basically to create, to close the bulge. Now that bulge that we talked about earlier, north of the reservoir, that sits on top of Kurakhove, that bulge is filled with, it's an artillery pocket, right? I don't think you're going to see like big howitzers in there. There might be a few, but there's going to be mortar crews that are there, and FPV pilots stationed secretly. Although probably most of the pilots are in Korocheva proper, right, where they're going to have uh, more protection than being out in a um, in a tree line next to a field. Very dangerous because both sides are constantly hunting FPV drone pilots. Anyway, so next slide will show you. Next two slides are gonna break down what Korohova is like. So there is a river that cuts through it. I've outlined in red. And on the east side, on the right side of it, is mostly residential buildings, houses, more vegetation. Separate. The houses are more sparsely populated. And this is where the Russians, according to some mappers, already have a foothold in. We'll get to it, but there's a very important stronghold that the Russians recently captured, plus a tree line immediately east and south of that. So if we go to the next slide, you see some yellow outlines, and these yellow outlines kind of break down what Korohova is like, right? So as I said, the rightmost outline that you see, that is where the residential houses are. Um, in the middle, you have the other side of the river, more residential, but more densely populated. The houses are closer together. Beneath that, you're going to see like a little outline. Those are high rises, and on the left side of this, you see another outline right in the middle. This is where there are like a cluster of high rises. So Kurahova is not going to be an easy town to take. And this is why the Russians are constantly flanking. What they want to do is they want to stop all supply roads, kind of like with Salidovo, right? The reason why Salidovo was very hard for about 2 months, the Russians did have a toehold in at one point. They were near the Terrakon, and this video footage of a BTR who killed or forced the retreat of Russian soldiers in that area on the eastern outskirts of Salidovo. You can see that in the latest video from last week by History Legends. So, but to go back to continue with the outlines here, the leftmost outline in the west, that is an industrial zone. So even more protection, right? Okay, so let's move to the next slide, and uh, you're going to see the toehold where the Russians have captured. You see right sort of near the top, the red outline with the yellow fortification. That's a very major fortification. That is not an easy fortification. That's not like a trench to stop tanks and armored personnel carriers. That is a um, like an infantry trench, but a very sophisticated one with good shelters. So the Russians took that, and that is what has allowed them to probably press already into eastern Kurakhove, which is what the reports are saying today. If you notice south of it, that greenish outline, the Russians gained more territory over the weekend. And but the first trench line that they captured, that is for stopping tanks. The trench lines after that are not for stopping tanks. They're going to be manned with infantry. How much? Again, we don't know, because so many of the fighters are that would have been here have been transferred to the Kursk front. So I think for the Ukrainians, I think they believe they can use Kursk as a bargaining chip. Now, Zelensky did mention last week a completely insane stuff. He said we could have captured the Kursk nuclear power plant, but we didn't. I mean, this is it's yeah,
Just because
yeah,
he's such a nice guy.
yeah. It's just so ridiculous. It's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. So, um, the next slide, you're going to see what the overall situation looks like. You can see the large pocket at the bottom and the smaller pocket at top surrounding Kurakhove. So, but before we move to the next slide, to just a little bit of news of Zaporozhye and so on, go to the bottom to the deep state map. I've outlined there the string of villages south of Kurakhove, and that is also like attacking head on for the Russians. There will be difficult, so they're probably going to um, try to flank this area again and work on um, stopping supply roads, right? The larger your front is against a city or a town or an agglomeration, the more vectors of attack you have. And so one of the reasons why the Russians were not very successful in some areas of the front is because um, they often only have one vector of attack, which made them easy to stop, right? And it's probably why in 2023 most of their fighting was really just defensive to stop the Ukrainian counteroffensive. But we're seeing different modes now taking place all throughout 2024. The Russians are always increasing or trying to increase the girth of their front when they're going towards a city. They want, like Pokrovsk is a very important city. Of course, it's a hub. Um, it's going to go down, like if it goes down, and when it goes down, it's going to go down with a major fight. So the Russians want as many of these other logistical areas that can hamper their efforts to be quelled first. So I don't know if you have the deep state map, but that basically
Yeah, I
shows
have that up.
what the Russians are contending with. Now, if we move back up, um, you can go to Zaporozhye. You can see where Velika Novosilovka is. And the news today is that the Russians have actually um, they have gone to the next town north, which is Makareyevka. There were one town even north of Makareyevka before the front, but so the Russians are steadily pushing towards Velika Novosilovka. You can see why, because it's less fortified. It's also an important east-west transit hub, right? And it could give them, so the flanks are very big, which means the Russians have enough personnel to do this. And they know that the Ukrainians do not, because a front this big, a counterattack by the Ukrainians can literally push can push them back. You saw this sometimes, this back and forth all throughout 2023 in the Zaporozhye front, right, over Rabotina. But I just wanted to bring that back up. Now, the next slide is the Kremenaya-Svatovo front. Everything around the Kupiansk is still holding. Even Putin described, he got into a little bit, maybe optimistically, about the Kupiansk front, that there's another pocket that is formed. We've already discussed on previous shows how the Russians have managed to reach the Oskal River. But this is south of the Oskal River, just south of it. This is in the Svatovo direction, which is the one town north of Kremenaya. And you can see the further gains the Russians made this weekend. And then the last sort of bit of news that I have is, now I haven't seen Weeb Union talk about this. Of course, History Legend does not always have videos out every week. That's not his style. He does much more in-depth analyses. But I noticed, I think it was on the 6th or 7th of November, there was apparently an attack by the Russians going into the Seversk front. Now, on previous shows, I showed the gains that the Russians made in that area. Now, Weeb Union did say that there's a heavy fortification, and it's on the high ground. And if the Russians keep pushing head on, that they probably won't be able to take it unless they flank it. And we've discussed on the show many times how successful the Ukrainians have been in Seversk, because if Seversk falls, that means basically that leaves not only the Sherebetsky forest in danger of being sort of flanked from the north and south, but it endangers Kramatorsk and the Slavyansk, which are the two major strongholds in the northwestern part of Donetsk region. So here's what he was basically saying. He cited this from a Russian blogger. And he says, on Saturday, November the 2nd, as part of an offensive on Belogorovka in the Seversky direction, the brigade commander of the 123rd Brigade of the 2nd LPR Corps with the call sign Kashtan sent 1st, 2nd, and 3rd mobilized rifle battalions and the 4th Tank Battalion in a frontal assault without providing fighters with fire support. So there are, I think, videos. I don't by the Ukrainians, I would presume. I'm reading from the section, the screen cap I gave you just north of Deep State, and so apparently now he doesn't get into any numbers, and again, I don't have any verification, but large losses of material and men of the Russians. What exactly happened here? He followed it for another day or two, and then I haven't heard anything since Friday. I checked yesterday's videos and Saturday's, and I don't have any update, but I thought that was interesting. And then there's a map of where this took place. This is the DEMA map. I've outlined where Seversk is and where the fighting took place south of Seversk in the Ivano-Darinka, Ivano-Dara? Yeah, Ivano-Darovka. That's the village that they're fighting for. So anyways, we'll update you if I find anything out, if Weeb Union mentions anything, but so far that's the only source I have at the moment. And really, that's all I have for the Frontline news in this area. I'll just to briefly return to Kurakhove. I will say that the attacks from the south, there's been many instances, and again, History Legends deals with this. I've talked about before I watched the video that the push from the south to the north, going to the underbelly of Kurakhove, mainly unobstructed. Some motorcycle crews, but also armored assaults. Whereas the Russians many times have made assaults into it. Like for instance, when I talked about taking that stronghold, so their armored personnel carriers were hit, but as we've said on the show, a lot of times most of the men survive these, and they immediately scatter and start going into the trenches. And if there isn't enough FPV drones, the toehold is there. And what often happens is the second and third waves are far more successful, as you could well imagine, right? Like,
Yes,
in
of
any
course.
war, this is always the case, right? It's just a buildup of forces, and then the opposing side just can't deal with it. But that's what I have for frontline news.
Well, I have one last piece of frontline news in Ukraine that is related to the big news of the week, and that
Mm.
is, according to Bezeglaya, Syrskyi has prepared the withdrawal from the Kursk region, and this news came out just hours after
Mm.
the election results. Um,
Yes,
so
that's
I
right.
don't know how much stock you want to put into this. Bezeglaya has said some strange things over the past few months, but has
Yes.
also said some very insightful things. Like I said, this isn't necessarily a quote unquote pro Russian individual as she is sitting in the router right now, and that would
Yep.
just be a non starter.
Yeah, she's Ukrainian.
Yeah, oh,
And we
absolutely.
discussed she's allowed to talk like this.
Yeah, it's some questions that she is the approved dissent within the router, which is few and far between today. Um, but she's alleged that Syrskyi has begun the process for withdrawing from Kursk. And I do think, especially as the incoming Trump administration does shape up, which once again I'll get into some news about that, depending on what direction it takes, depending on who he surrounds himself with, that will determine many of the Ukrainian actions. And that will, or even on that note, with the outgoing Biden administration, that may shape the actions as well, depending on what signals they get from them, what communications they have with them. If Biden is willing to do a last minute spiteful action, which, given some of his recent behavior, I'm not so sure about.
Hmm.
Like I said, we'll get into that a little bit later. But I do think you are going to see the Ukrainians take a much more, I guess you could say, conservative approach to the war now that things are much less certain under the incoming administration. Obviously, their preferred candidate lost, and they do, at least on the surface, express some fear about Trump and his policy towards Ukraine and what that might look like going forward. But that is really all the news I had for Ukraine, unless you have anything last minute.
Um, I I'm trying to search for it here. The Institute for the Study of War had an interesting article. Yes, here it is. The numbers are in. Remember, this is like Victoria Nuland and her husband Kagan who came up with this, right? And Kagan's brother is married to Anne Applebaum, who's married to what's his name?
Sikorsky,
Sikorsky. I forget what's his first name. Is it Radoslav or
Radek, I believe.
Radek? Yeah, which is like a diminutive form. Anyways, here's what it says. Ukraine has lost about 200 tanks, 650 armored vehicles, and sustained 80,000 casualties, and lost about 1,500 square kilometers in September and October. They just that is. I'm going to send you, Constantine, the I believe this was a tweet, and it outlines where this has happened, where have the 1,500 square kilometers been lost. So you can tell these are big losses by the Ukrainians. 80,000 casualties. That includes both dead and wounded, but that is still a very large number. Um, Yeah, and actually, some latest news from Scott Calibrated. Here is a map of what is going on in Kurakhove. So the Russians are expanding that control. As I said, they want to get rid of that pocket that's south of them before they try to go head on, and they will need to move from the north south toward Kurakhove, toward there are three Ilinkas in this region. There is Ilinka close to Kurakhove, Ilinka south of Kurakhove, like well south, and Nova Ilinka, which is on the north side of the water reservoir that also borders Kurakhove. And there's a town called Ismailovka. Remember, I told you I had an aunt who passed away many years ago. Her name was Ilinka. Her her first husband's last name, like her last name was Ismailovska. I just thought it was so
Huh.
weird. Anyways, so all the way in Ukraine and Novorossiya, that name is a popular name. Um, anyways, so there you have it. That is sort of the wrap up for the front line, and we can get to the other news.
Well, speaking of implosions, before I want to get into any brief Middle Eastern news or any election news, I just want to talk about what's happening in Germany right now. And that
Yes.
is the deindustrialization continues. And
Hmm.
I'll just go over some economic figures, particularly concerns over BMW and Volkswagen, which are the two big auto industries in Germany. And of course, uh, industrial chemicals are another one, which, having been cut off from Russian gas, is a concern as well because of how vital natural gas is for the manufacturing of industrial chemicals. But, like I said, I'll get into all of that. I just want to read brief a brief readout of some economic issues in Germany just over the past few months. So, Volkswagen is closing three facilities in Germany to cut $4.3 billion in losses. And you do have union workers in Germany from IG Metall who are planning strikes in December. And you also had one of the Volkswagen plant workers who are planning strikes right now. Uh, One of the other issues with the German auto industry is not only the economic effects of the Russian Ukraine war, but that is also the quote unquote shift to electric vehicles, which has uh, been a fool's errand, to say the least.
Yeah.
And that even with the subsidies they get from the government, they are still unable to compete with China, and that Chinese production of electric vehicles, uh, they just crank them out faster for a lower cost. There's really no competition there. And that there was a 10.2% drop in Volkswagen sales in China just within 2024, which wiped out any gains they might have had made otherwise, and that Audi, which is a Volkswagen subsidiary, is going to cut its workforce by 15%. Now, mind you, these are flagship industries of Germany where they do not touch the workforce traditionally. These are companies that have survived, in some cases, two world wars. They've survived economic crisis. They survived '08. Like I said, pretty much every major event of the past 150 years. That might be dating a little bit back for some of these, but for the past century plus, they've weathered every crisis. Now they're shuttering across Germany. They're outsourcing. They're going to China. They're going to the United States. They're going anywhere because it is simply not affordable. Ironically enough, the most successful wing of the German auto industry in Europe seems to be in Hungary at this point. The Hungarians have gotten in on electric car manufacturing, and they've courted these plants from the Germans. Um, but to move on with some of the other just brief economic news out of Germany, industrial orders for August fell by 5.8% compared to previous month, um, according to that is Siemens, who is um, once again one of those institutions out of Germany, but it's getting aside the point. And there's also been bankruptcy or insolvency from the following for Schumag AG from Aachen, which was founded in 1830. They um, manufacture precise metal products. Uh, Laukhammer Art Foundry, which is Germany's oldest, after 275 years, and has the claim on the world's first cast iron in one piece, is also facing bankruptcy or insolvency. You have Schuckra Pukert, which is a refrigerator manufacturer from Bavaria, founded in 1871. Um, You have the confectionery Lay Cipher, which has existed since 1909. Private hospital uh, Diakon Iverk Munich Maxvorstadt, which was founded in 1867, which is one of the oldest institutions in Bavaria. Uh, there's a bakery chain called uh, Krakenfeld Hans GmbH, 340 years in operation, and that's just for the month of November. Those are just the most recent reports of the month of November for what's happening in Germany right now. And you also, funny enough, the day after the election, had a crisis in confidence in the German government. I want to get the exact story because Germany is ruled right now by one of those Frankenstein coalitions because nobody has been able to produce even a significant enough plurality to have a dominant foot in the coalition. So even though you have the SPD leading the coalition with Olaf Scholz in power right now, he still is reliant on the Green Party, and also I think it's the Free Democrats is the other one. They call it the traffic light coalition because you have the red, green, and yellow. And it does look like, given the recent successes of the AFD and Wagenknecht's party, that the crisis of confidence in Germany is it is heading for government collapse in early elections because they weren't slated for elections until September of 2025, but it looks like they are going to fail confidence vote on their budget, and Schloz's government is going to start imploding. And this comes after they have put out signals that we no longer have enough money to give to Ukraine, and just these very strange statements. We don't have the weaponry to give to Ukraine. We don't want to risk the escalation. Where Schloss has been trying to pivot, saying maybe it's time for negotiations, even though he got snubbed by Putin because of his inaction thus far. But Germany is starting to shift, and like I said, probably the deindustrialization, which does connect back to all these different stories, is the big issue here. But it's getting to the point where Germany as a manufacturing powerhouse is a thing of the past, and I don't think it's on the path to being so. I think it already is. If we see the economic fallout of this war play out the way it looks like it's going to play out, then Germany's economy is toast. Once one of the strongest, most robust economies in Europe, if not the world, it's done. And who knows how long it would take for recovery? Who knows if they could ever achieve the level of industrial output that they have before? And really, what does it look like for them? Energy costs are up. I mean, even have von der Leyen come out and saying we might need to buy oil directly from the Russians because we're only giving them more money when we buy it through third parties. So already they're starting to fall into place with that. But that's also on top of von der Leyen, who is head of the European Commission, has also reintroduced the idea of shipping in LNG from Europe now that Trump is in office because they suspect that he will be better for the domestic American energy industry, which is true. But once again, the cost of shipping LNG over the Atlantic from the United States into Europe, into those ports they tried to build in Spain, a much more expensive enterprise than the current pipeline system they have set up with the Russians. So even if we do get that, it's going to be more of an expense, more of a burden on Europe. And I suppose we can get into some of the peace proposals that the Europeans have brought up for Ukraine in light of recent election news before we actually do get into that. And let me see if I can find this map. You've seen the one of the demilitarized zones that they want policed by the various
Yes,
European armed
by a force of
forces.
like 500,000. Now he says no American troops, but British and other EU country troops, no NATO troops. I mean, this is ridiculous. The Russians are never going to go along with this. Like, why would they do this?
No, no, there's no motivation for them to do this. And more or less, the DMZ that they are proposing would be the current front lines. Uh, the Europeans said they've made no guarantee of denying Ukraine NATO membership, which has been the big sticking point. And Russia has the momentum in this war. They have no reason to to sue for peace. They would get none of their demands, and it is just asking more and more concessions of Russia barring territory, which they said that they would not recognize as Russian territory. It would just be a simple freezing of the conflict. And you are getting, I guess you could say, similar signals out of the U.S., except Trump allegedly promised that there would be a 20-year delay on uh, Ukraine
Yeah,
joining
right.
NATO. But like I said, a lot of that is up in the air. It remains to be seen who he surrounds himself with once he gets into office. How much is typical Trump bluster? How much is actual serious pen to paper policy? But like I said, there's a lot of questions in that regard. But point being
I
is,
think if you go ahead.
everyone is really starting to feel the heat, and they realize that if they don't broker some sort of settlement now, it's more or less just going to have the Russians being eating at Ukraine until it falls.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I think if you look at if you look at what I'm going to send you this is a funny series of tweets. We can deal with that later if we have time. But uh, now Zelensky has been very vocal prior to Trump's victorious election results. He's spoken much less. Of course, there was a call between apparently between him and Trump and Musk, right? So Musk, of course, is still supplying Ukraine with the what do you call the system?
Starlink satellites.
Starlink, yeah, Starlink. I was going to say North Star. Anyways, so um, Musk has a pretty good idea of the Russian troops where they are, both in and in Ukraine, the Ukrainian. Without that, Ukraine, would have fallen in the first year. So Trump's offer, Trump knows that the Russians will refuse this offer. Zelensky, considering the kind of conversation he apparently had with Musk and Trump, is unusually quiet. Remember that the last 2 weeks he's been very angry. He's been upset. He's talking about the time for hugs with Russia has passed. We need more missiles. Please remember that the New York Times leaked out that he had requested for Tomahawk missiles, which have a range of like 1,500 to 2,300 kilometers, for I forget whether it was kilometers or miles, but these are very long distance. These missiles can well go past Moscow. Okay, they can probably go to the Yamal Peninsula. Like they can go very far. Okay, or Murmansk. In any case, they can be nuclear. They can receive nuclear warheads. So he's very quiet because, of course, I think the only thing that's happening here is the Americans are making an offer to the Russians that they know that the Americans know the Russians will refuse, and that will give Trump the go-ahead to continue funding Ukraine. Because if the Russians refuse, Trump will be forced into groveling. And if he grovels, he's going to look weak. Trump, under no circumstances, wants to look weak. No matter how many times it's been disproven that he's a Putin puppet, uh, that is now part of the culture war. It's a
It's
falsehood that's
woven into
repeated
the
over and
public
over again.
consciousness.
Yes, it's part of the public consciousness, especially with shit libs and Dems. Um, I mean, there's so many things that they repeat over and over again, like even though the Steele dossier, which Hillary Clinton paid for, and Steele was a former British MI6 officer,
Oh yeah, and that's on top
agent.
of, once again, people keep on talking about, rightfully so, the labor scandal where they sent their proxies to interfere for Kamala Harris. And what a lot of people didn't realize at the time is that British interference against Trump goes all the way back to the Steele dossier.
Yes, absolutely, exactly. I'm so glad you said that. So, or Trump went to a cemetery, a military cemetery, and all the guys who died in World War II were chumps, like as if he's like a neo-Nazi on the day of the stormers. Like, I mean, give me a. This
Yeah,
has
and
been
and they
disproven.
tried
They
to
repeat it all the time.
and they tried to cycle that story under two different circumstances. First, they said he said in 2018, then they said he said in 2020. It goes back and
Yeah.
forth between World War One, World War Two. So the details are
Yes.
never consistent on the story,
Never.
but
Yes.
it's in the public consciousness.
That's right. And people will just repeat it because this is what they want to hear, right? So, anyways, Trump, I cannot see Trump groveling with Putin to go along with what Putin wants, which no NATO membership whatsoever, not only Crimea and both Donbass regions, but um, Zaporozhye and Kherson, the full extent of their lawful borders are given to Russia, right? And that would include Kherson City, which is a small city, but also Zaporozhye City, which is a larger city on the Dnieper. Um, you know, like he's not. Like this war, like from the beginning, even in late 2021, offers are made that they know will be rejected, and that's what I think this is about. Like, um, America and Europe are not going to give up ever. Like it will destroy them, but they will never give up on destroying Russia or acquiring Russia. Like there are two things that matter the most for America, and that is Israel and destroying Russia. That's it.
Yeah,
Everything else is absolutely secondary. And the tug of war, like the reason you see Trump's election, the reason you didn't see the kind of concerted effort that you saw in 2020 and even in 2016 by comparison to 2024 is because, you know, the crowd that supports Israel, they won. They kind of lost against the technocrats earlier, sort of with Biden. Um, it's not that that any U.S. president isn't like a simp for Israel. They are, but like Israel's always looking for the biggest simp, and Trump is just the biggest simp for them. He's going to get their backing. Now, I don't want to be too negative. Like I know really nice guys who like listen to our chat, like George Washington. You can tell he's a sweet man. And I don't mean to make him blush. And I want the things that Trump promises for America. Like never forget that. But and I'm not one of those guys. I'm not in that stupid Richard Spencer crowd that like got burned by Trump and like but I'm just saying like hope, you know, hope like the thing about what there is for the future for our guys, you know. Uh, see if you can persuade, even manipulate Trump, but just know, you know, who is backing him. Now I know there's been some good news this the last couple of days. Pompeo and Nikki Haley are not coming back to the administration, which is excellent news. However, the woman he has chosen, I forget her name, she's a young woman that's going to represent the U.S. in the UN. She is part of that you know, the Atlantic Council think tank. Um, you know,
Stefanik, the
CSIS.
congresswoman from New York, who I think is
That's right.
insufferable on a lot of different levels, but that's beside the point.
Yeah. So um, that could be like the neocons getting you know, having a little crumb at the table. Could that turn into something more? I don't know. um you know, time will tell. Some people say that you know, we can figure out where Trump is going to go very quickly. I don't know if you can. He is unpredictable, and I just say, look, keep in mind who pulls on his levers from time to time. They can't completely control him. Like, for instance, there's talks again that U.S. troops are going to leave Syria. Remember what happened last time? There were talks that U.S. troops are going to leave Syria. Like, you know, Turkey's talking about that again now. But like, what will Turkey do, right? So, or what will America allow Turkey to do? I just I don't see the U.S. giving up so easily. Listen, so
Well, with that
I'm
being said,
belaboring the point.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I will get a little bit more into Trump domestic side. Just overall, post mortem of the election, all of that. But what I do want to say about Trump first off is I said this before the election, and I said in the likely event that he is reelected, we would see his foreign policy return to what it was during his first term, which is schizophrenia. Two or sometimes even three completely different messages coming out all at once, where you have
Yeah,
Trump's agenda, you have Trump's team agenda, and then you have the agenda of the American empire itself. And
yeah. Well
sometimes
put.
two of those align against the other. Sometimes all three are in line. Sometimes they all diverge from one another. And I think a lot of people who are either very excited or very pessimistic about Trump, at least in terms of foreign policy and the American empire, have forgotten what his first term looked like, where there was a lot of internal resistance from Trump despite his mistakes against the latter two, but the latter two also won in many cases. Now, it did seem throughout his first term, he did purge his cabinet's foreign policy team on a semi-regular basis because he started out. You had Mike Flynn, National Security Advisor. You had Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State. They were both out in 2017. Then you had Pompeo. You had John Bolton. He dismisses John Bolton, who, if you believe what he says, going back to the Rogan interview, that he brought Bolton in just to play good cop, bad cop with particularly North Korea in that case, but despised him otherwise. And even wasn't charitable towards Pompeo, who Pompeo was one of his I wouldn't say most loyal, but one of his more loyal members of his cabinet, especially in 2020 as things started to fall apart for Trump. But it is up in the air depending on who we get to staff it. Ironically enough, given Trump's foreign policy aims, especially if we are to believe that a pivot to Asia underway, he might actually want somebody like Rex Tillerson back, who can be more conciliatory towards the Russians. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's too much personal animus there for something like that to happen. Even though I think there was a lot of lost potential with Rex Tillerson, just personally speaking. I think he was one of Trump's better picks the first term. You can say I'm wrong about that, whatever. But you did send me a couple things. One of the comments from Peskov and actually Assad's comments as well, where Peskov has said that Putin has not spoken to Trump and has denied that there's any specific plans. And Erdogan had left the room with Assad when they began speaking. Had left the room when Assad began speaking at the Arab Islamic Summit in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, which once again, major move that Assad is in Saudi Arabia at all. And he, so once again, we're seeing the developments there. Erdogan has taken has gone back and forth in Syria over the past several months. That you saw some attempts at reconciliation, then you saw further incursions by the Turks in there, and now that Trump's in there, it's a whole new dynamic. Trump and Erdogan had a very strange relationship in that regard, where it was very hostile at times, but also very cooperative. And like I said, I think anyone who is curious about Trump's foreign policy in particular has forgotten his first term, and that although global tensions have escalated, although a lot has changed on the world stage, Trump in that regard has not changed. So we will likely see repeats of what we saw just 4, 5, and all the way up to 8 years ago. Now in domestic policy, I think there are some more questions to be asked, especially with who he's surrounding himself with. If some of his more, let's just say, outlandish promises are going to even come close to being true is another question, which I suppose we can delve into. But like I said, I think Trump's foreign policy, a lot of people are reading too much into it. And if you want to know what he's going to do, just study his first term and try to apply it to current situations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, uh, I mean, Trump isn't even inaugurated yet. We're still 2 months away. So, you know,
Even though
at
the
least at least 2 months. More closer to three. So
yeah, it's
we're
like
still
two
a
and a half
ways.
months. January 20th, 2025 is going to be the actual inauguration date. But one encouraging thing I did see on top of the Pompeo Haley news, which I know Stefanik isn't much better than those two, but regardless, one of the more positive notes that I did see is that one of Trump's first phone calls after being elected was with Orban.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if somebody like Orban, especially on European affairs, can have his ear, there might be some hope for breakthrough. But I do think all the other pressures on Trump make negotiating with Russia an almost impossible task because any sort of conciliatory action, any sort of even the most minor concession made, as you were saying, is going to bring Russiagate back up. We're going to hear about Robert Mueller until the end of time if that happens. So he does have to come in with the quote unquote tough peace deal and then is forced to more or less continue status quo, maybe cut funding a little here and there, maybe actually do shift the burden to the Europeans as he said he was going to during his campaign. But I suppose the best you could say is there might be a quiet defunding of Ukraine where Ukraine gets a little bit less. And you're already starting to see some
Mm-hmm.
moves towards that right now. But in terms of outright brokered peace, Trump, because of scandals that frankly don't exist, but a lot of people still do exist, has his hands tied. Much like in the first term, he had his hands tied when it came to anything diplomatically with Russia because he was under immense domestic pressure. Now, I don't think the Russiagate investigations will return. I don't think that they're going to be nearly as adamant about impeachment, especially with Democrats not controlling Congress. We'll see how 2026 goes, who controls Congress at that point. But aside from the finger wagging, aside from the crying and whining, I don't think in terms of legal actions or any sort of down and dirty politics that they're going to treat Trump like they did the first time. Going back to some theories, I do think that the establishment has largely made peace with him and that they expect him to deliver on some of the Middle Eastern issues, which I suppose with that being said, we can talk about his Middle Eastern policy.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Oh, just one bit of news. Like, remember I was telling you a bridge. So it was actually a dam that was destroyed in Kurakhove. That I said at the beginning of the show. Apparently, like one of the IDAR members mentioned this.
Yeah, sounds about right.
So yeah.
But with the question of Trump's Middle Eastern foreign policy, which, like I said, I'll get into before I get into some of the other heavier election stuff, and that is a lot of people, understandably so, expect him to back Israel to the hilt, which to some degree, in some ways, he probably will. But I do think one thing worth considering is that him and Netanyahu had a very contentious relationship between personalities. Now, I'm not even going to necessarily say a personal relationship, but the public figure of Trump and the public figure of Netanyahu often butted heads. And there
That's
was
true,
there was
especially
even
regarding Syria.
oh yeah, there was rumors of this behind closed doors. I was actually just about to bring up the Syria issue. Then in 2018, after Trump's strikes on Syria, Netanyahu was pushing for the U.S. to go further to make a sustained campaign. The U.S. refused. Trump refused, and that is when you got the wave of throughout 2018, spring summer 2018, where the Israelis every week were hitting Syrian targets. I'm sure all of you remember that, where it was just constant hitting of targets in Syria, Iranian targets in Syria. Just even the day after Trump did his strikes on some of the Syrian air bases in 2018, not to be confused with the 2017 one, it was less than 24 hours afterwards. Israeli jets were in the sky just hammering Syrian positions. And the Syrian air defenses, to their credit, did provide some resistance to that, but it was extremely contentious, and it continued on that way. And you would see this every time the question of Syria would come up in American foreign policy. Netanyahu, who was in power at the time, would launch some sort of attack against Syria, and that my read on it at least, and I think it still holds up even 6 years later, is that whenever Netanyahu had a frustration with Washington, he would hammer Syrian targets. It was his way of lashing out. It was his way of expressing
Mhm.
dissatisfaction, more or less telling Trump, telling his people, you should be the ones doing this. I shouldn't have to do this. But I'm forced to take these punitive strikes on Syria and on these Iranian groups in Syria, and you should be doing this. So there was certainly a personal rift between Trump and Netanyahu, despite the very warm relationship between the United States and Israel and the very close relationship between the United States and Israel. And especially considering that Netanyahu was one of the first people to congratulate Biden, which Trump still brings up the 2020 election all the time. He's still very understandably frustrated about that. But Netanyahu showed that he didn't even stay his hand because there were some people who just stayed their hand, who didn't say anything, who didn't send their congratulations to Biden until the issue was all said and done. But Netanyahu was rather eager to snake on Trump at the first opportunity he got. And we saw what happened to Netanyahu's political career from them. From then, he got kicked out of office. You had Bennett and then Lapid. Then they brought him back in, and then you had this massive escalation in the region once Netanyahu got back in. So I do think, ideally, Trump does want to pull the leash on Netanyahu. One interesting thing to note is that Jared Kushner has declined to serve in this administration in any capacity, not even as an
Mhm.
advisor. So he has been sidelined, and I know that a lot of the, let's just say, less desirable Trump policies, both on a domestic and foreign policy level, were from Kushner and were from Kushner's people. So it looks like that has been sidelined, whereas Trump's other son, either Eric Trump or Donald Trump Jr., I can't remember which one, was already saying that they want to keep on the quote unquote neocons out of the administration. So we'll see what exactly that means and how they define neocon moving forward with that. But like I said, when it comes to Middle Eastern policy, I'm sure that the quote unquote maximum pressure campaign against the Iranians will continue. That it will be just a constant effort of Trump trying to court the Gulf states back into their, I would say, pre 2021 positions where they are broadly aligned with the U.S. and that they are uh, at odds with the Iranians. But once again, I think that in that regard, especially with Saudi Arabia, too much diplomatic progress has been made over the past 3-4 years in order for a reversal on that. And
I
that,
mean, Assad is in Saudi Arabia
yes,
now,
Assad is in Saudi Arabia, as we had mentioned. And
and
that,
apparently Erdogan left the room when he began speaking.
yes. So I don't know. Erdogan might be Trump's ace up his sleeve, and we'll see what he can do with that. But the U.S., much like under Biden, I don't think this would necessarily change under Trump, does not have enough to offer to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states to get them to reverse their current course and return to the status quo. It's just simply not there. Even with a strong personality like Trump in office, it's not there. And I think just for practical reasons, even if he would love to, which I think is still up for debate, but just for practical reasons, the U.S. is not able to conduct any sort of large scale military operation against the Iranians. It's just out of the question. So the next option is containment. And when all of Iran's neighbors are warming up to them and there's diplomatic breakthroughs, particularly led by the Chinese, I think that's a much harder prospect than what it was, say, in 2019 or 2020.
Yeah, this kind of brings me to some statements that Kissinger recently made. Um, let me find it. Hold on. Yeah, so this is very interesting. This is from November 9th. So this
2023, I
is,
assume.
pardon me?
2023, I assume, because he died last November. So this
Oh,
like would
yeah,
have been
yes,
like
yes,
one of
sorry,
his.
sorry, sorry, sorry.
These would have been like some of his last public statements, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry about that. Yeah, so this is remember that June 1st, 2022 is when he said that Ukraine should sue for peace. And even after the Kharkov and Kherson offensives by the Ukrainians, which were successful, um, he still maintained that position. There was a statement that he gave. Well, there were several statements leading up to December the 18th, but even in December the 18th, he said that. And also remembered that Milley, either in December or the first week of January of that year, also made the same statement, like sue for peace, right? You got these territories back, freeze the conflict now. Like a lot of people forget that, and so did the Rand Corporation. We read those documents, if people remember. So anyway, so here's what Henry Kissinger had to say: is Kissinger embarks on a disquisition about Russia's almost mythical tolerance for suffering. This is a point that I've made many times throughout our years on the show. He says the key point is that the West wrongly assumed the years before Putin annexed Crimea that Russia would adopt a Western rules based order. NATO misread Russia's deep seated craving for respect. quote, "The mistake NATO made is to think that there is a sort of historic evolution that will march across Eurasia and not to understand that somewhere on that march it will encounter something very different to a Westphalian entity. And for Russia, this is a challenge to its identity. Do you mean that we provoke Putin?" I asked. "I do not think Putin is a character like Hitler," Kissinger replies. "He comes out of Dostoevsky." And here's what he had to say about Trump. "I don't want to talk too much about Trump because at some point I should do it in a more coherent way than this," Kissinger replies. "But you are being coherent," I protest. "Please don't stop. There is another pregnant silence." Kissinger replies, "I think Trump may be one of those figures in history who appears from time to time to mark the end of an era and to force it to give up its old pretenses. It doesn't necessarily mean that he knows this or that he is considering any great alternative. It could just be an accident." And also for you listeners, when Kissinger was in in college, he did his dissertation on Oswald Spengler's The Decline of the West, and he bought Nixon a copy of Oswald Spengler's The Decline of the West, which Nixon kept on his desk. So just know that, like he, I like yes, I know he's done some evil things, but the guy he
No, no, he's
makes these
sharp.
statements because he has a philosophy of history to inform him rather than just dates and facts and a more materialist approach. How many times have we said on the show, even like very early on when I said why I wanted to sneak into Ukraine and photograph like what life was there back, in 2015, is because like of what he's saying, right? Like all those people in eastern Ukraine, hey, just go along with it. In a few years, you might be in the EU, the NATO. You could be richer. I know that doesn't necessarily exclude problems such as Ukrainian only and clamping down, but maybe there would have been a half measure that would have been applied by the Ukrainians instead of the full measure that we saw evolve over the years after the Maidan. But so I often ask myself, so why do it, right? Like, why didn't when Russia was on its knees and it was fighting the Chechnya War, the first one was unsuccessful as opposed to the second one. Why didn't it balkanize then, right? Why didn't it happen? Um, and I'm so glad that he said this about um, the conceit of the West is of course is based on a linear understanding of time and that they are ahead in the evolutionary process. And one, the other things I've often said is, some things like, let's say, the invention of fire or whatever affect everybody. Or let's say an alphabet comes along. Like, I often distinguish between the empires or the Greco-Roman civilization. Then what followed was the Celtic Germanic civilization, what some people call the Faustian. They're using Latin letters or Greek letters, but Latin basically. They're using however derivative it might be. Yeah, that stays, but that doesn't describe Western civilization. Just look at the Cologne Cathedral and how that is so. It is as radically different from, let's say, the Colosseum or any of the temples built in Greece or Rome during the heights of each of those civilizations. It is so utterly different. It
Oh,
is as
it's a
different as a Japanese medieval fortress. It's totally different,
it's a complete
and
departure.
that's not nothing. Like that's not fluff. Like often what people think is like a lot of people just think in a kind of in a materialist way that these these artifacts they describe something just skin deep. They don't. They describe a kind of unseen essence of a people in a civilization, that kind of striving that you see in Gothic architecture, which is so overwhelming, which is shooting for the sky, which is so grand, instead of that sort of placid summit at rest that you see with Greco-Roman architecture.
Oh, absolutely.
So, anyways, it's interesting he saw that, and he's always going to be a fellow Spenglerite in my book.
I mean, look, I first off, I'm just gonna co-sign everything you said because I could just sit here and repeat it in a different way, but that would just be a waste of everyone's time. Because I mean, we've talked about Spangler plenty on the show. But going back to Kissinger in particular, uh, yes, he was a complete bastard. I don't think anyone can deny that. But especially compared to the crop of foreign policy elites today, he looks very sane. He looks very measured,
Yeah.
and he even looks significantly less evil in that regard. In that,
Hmm.
a lot of the, let's just say things that were done, I'm not going to say could be justified, but had an ultimate end, whereas what we're looking at right now just simply does not. And there's, like I said, I don't think there's really any question to be had about that. But with all that being said, I suppose we should move on to some of the, let's just say, more sensationalist parts of the Trump victory.
Yes, yes.
And let's just start here. I'll put up the election map because all the results are officially in. Trump did win the 312 majority that a lot of people were expecting. I thought it was going to be much narrower. Just for context, I'll put up my election map again, just so
I was surprised too, by the
yeah.
way.
So this was my prediction. I'll get it right there where he ekes out with Pennsylvania and Arizona and Georgia. So I had the swing states split about evenly, but with Trump at the slight advantage. With, in my opinion, Pennsylvania being the deciding factor. But I thought Harris was going to get Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nevada. Nevada, I don't know whether it's just something that was in my mind, whether it's just something subconsciously. I just had a refusal to believe that was going to go Republican under any circumstances. Maybe it's because they've been saying, oh, the Republicans are going to take Nevada back every election cycle, but I simply didn't believe it. To compare to my maximalist results for Trump right here, I had all the swing states plus Virginia. I was wrong about Virginia, but for those of you who were watching live on election night, it did look like I was almost right on that point. He was leading for most of the night in Virginia, but then it came in last minute and Harris won by 2 points. But point being is the election margins in some of these states that Trump won. Let me just get the exact popular vote total right here. So right now, this is with majority of the votes counted. You're just looking at the AP results right here. Trump won 50.4% of the popular vote versus Harris's 48. And then, of course, there are just the speckle of third parties. Jill Stein actually did the best. So, uh, funny enough with that, we finally have the Green Party coming in third place for the first time, I think, since 2000, since Ralph Nader. And a lot of that is on the Palestinian issue. A lot of that is on the Middle Eastern issues because a lot of the further left crowd found Harris unconscionable on those issues. So it came in for that. And then Kennedy was still on the ballot in a number of quote unquote safe states. So he did pick up fourth place. And the Libertarian candidate, fortunately, came in dead last out of all the, let's say, recognizable candidates. So that was fun to watch. But Trump has secured victory. And once again, we're talking about in some states like New Jersey, within about 5 points, to typically Democratic stronghold, came within 11 points in New York, which is usually a two-thirds majority. So just absolutely ridiculous margins, even in the states he didn't win. I think Illinois was still within like less than 10% for Trump. Same with Minnesota. So New Hampshire was another one that was. Now I know New Hampshire also does have a slight Republican streak there, in that a lot of statewide officials are Republican. Maine second district, of course, did go for Trump as well. But point being is, Harris performed very poorly. And while I do think there was wind behind Trump's sails, while I do think that he was able to renew his popularity and renew his appeal to the American public, that is combined with the fact that Harris was a particularly weak candidate. Put in there less than 4 months before the election, about 3.5 months before the election. No primary process, just sprung on the American people under the most bizarre of circumstances. Her campaign was uh, here's how I put it the other day. Her campaign was a middle-aged woman's idea of appeal to young people. that's
Yes.
that's what it was. And even like in all the key demographics here, I want to just go through some of the exit polling data, so I'll get that ready because it was some bizarre stuff. So let me just particularly the MSNBC exit polling. So let me just go ahead and pull it up right here, and I'll try to get that up in just a moment. So I'll switch screens right here to um, MSNBC. Oh, I'm sorry, NBC, and we'll go ahead and put that right up here. So just for starters, a lot of people thought for some reason this was going to be a very divided election on gender lines, but it was actually, I mean, it wasn't. It wasn't even close to I think what Clinton got, and of course, Clinton was a much stronger candidate than Harris. So men 55-42 with third party votes in there, women 45-53. But where I think it gets interesting is when you get into the statistics right here, down on the racial level, because I think that is the true divide in American politics. And look, I know about the women and what they do. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here to
Mm.
I'm not here to be the number one supporter of women. Of course, plenty of great women out
That's
there.
what we do off here, so we don't lose followers.
Yes, yes, plenty of great women. Especially, I'll get into some of the statistics right here, where I do have praise for them. But yes, Trump won the white vote by 57. Um, Still made massive and these are just key swing states, which you can extrapolate to the rest of the country, just given the spread of it. So I'm not going to go through each one, but just for context, it's these ones right here: Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Wisconsin. So it's just an aggregate of those results, and you can, with that spread of states, you can easily extrapolate to the rest of the country. But once again, you saw that Trump picked up 13%. There's that number again: 13% of the black vote.
Oh my God.
Um, but point being is, for a Republican candidate to break double digits among the black vote, that's unheard of. Even more surprisingly, the Hispanic Latino vote was almost 50-50, just a slight Democratic majority. Asians he did about typical Republican numbers with. Amerindians he did quite well with. Nobody would have expected that, at least in my opinion. And then you get to the race and gender breakdown. Oh, these are actually updated figures from what I last saw, I think. White men went 60-37, third party candidates. White women, Trump actually maintained the majority that he took them with in 2016, which was 53%. Went up to 55% last election. Still 55% among white women for the GOP in the 2022 midterms. And like I said, a lot of these numbers have remained stable, but went back down. So I guess there were just a few Winans who maybe went for Trump the first time and second time, but for some reason were taken in by Kamala Harris's campaign of joy. I don't know, but there are just some discrepancies there. Maybe some third-party defectors. Who knows? A lot of questions. Once again, black men was one of the other surprising ones where he broke into the 20s with them, only 21%. Even black women at 7% is still unheard of for a Republican. They usually don't break more than I don't know, say 3-4% with them.
Hmm.
Hispanic men, once again, 55-45. That's like what white women were last election, unheard of. And even Hispanic women at 38%. And I'm not going to go through all these, but just to point out some of the other ones. Young people, once again, coming in within an 11-point difference. And then you go down to actually age by race, which is another one. Uh, Evenly split among white people ages 18 to 29. 30 to 44 broke for Trump, and pretty much every white demographic after that broke for Trump, and a majority, with 45 to 64 being the biggest ones of those. And then, of course, they get down to the breakdown of education, blah blah blah, education by race, income, which it seems like that Trump actually won every income bracket except under 30,000, and over 200,000. So it is interesting that like you do. I know a lot of people, and I don't want to get too far into the high, middle versus low concept, but you do see that kind of play out in the income brackets here. But one of the other ones I wanted to go to was where was it? Oh, the issues that people actually voted on. So they brought up the issue of inflation and that people overwhelmingly broke for Trump even on severe and moderate hardship. So once again, speaking to a lot of economic issues. Some pessimistic in the electorate where they say America's best days were behind them. They still broke for Trump. Um, about direction of the country, those who were enthusiastic, of course, were overwhelmingly for Harris. Those who were angry were overwhelmingly for Trump. So, like I said, it's all the issues. But here's the one I was looking for right here. Which one of these five issues mattered most? Foreign policy broke 57% for Trump. Abortion, of course. Harris's only campaign platform was 74% for her. The economy, Trump won 80% of voters' confidence on the economy. Immigration, 90%. And of course, the state of democracy,
Oh
80%.
God.
So I mean, you look at the breakdown of issues right here. Like it was the entire Harris campaign: abortion, threat to democracy. Those were the only issues. But when it came to the real issues, and like I said, this is across party lines. This is just swing voters in general. In these key states, it was foreign policy. It was concern over everything happening, which, like I said, and it has the percentage totals of what the percentage of population concern was for that. But once again, economically 80% for Trump, that's pathetic. And especially given the Democratic Party's more recent platforms of being the representative of the union workers of the Rust Belt. And I'll go back to the election results in a minute here, and I'll parse this out a little more. But like I said, you can get into all of these issues, blah blah blah. But it was just these main five right here. Where were they? Where, like I said, on any issue that actually had everyday relevance, Trump just blew it out of the water. And the pet
Yeah.
issues, Harris won on. But and I mean, who knows what those figures would have looked like under Biden, assuming they kept him under wraps and kept his senility under control. Which, don't worry, I'll get into Biden in just a second here. But did you have anything to add with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm shocked. He swept all six swing states, right? You've got shitlib saying that the election was rigged. It's kind of funny to have it thrown back at them like this. I am kind of enjoying that.
Election denialism
Um,
will not be tolerated.
Election denial. So Tom Hanks has left America, but he promises he'll be. He literally said that. What was that stupid film he did? Right, he said, "When I found out Trump won, I knew it was time for Run, Forrest, Run." Like, what the hell? Like, this dude is so cringe. So he's leaving. He's leaving. I mean, who's gonna miss him, right?
When was the last time we went to a
Anyways,
Tom
but
Hanks
he
movie?
promised that it's temporary because after 4 years he'll come back. It's like, I mean, of course the majority of, I'm curious to see if this guy, I mean, apparently he's left, but like, let's see if it's a few weeks or he comes back next year. I don't know. I just thought that was hilarious. So yeah, Trump's victory did surprise me. I think I always felt he was going to win because of the way that Zuckerberg didn't go against him this time. Musk, of course, bought Twitter the year 2 years before the election or thereabouts.
Yeah, April
Uh,
2022, I think it was.
yeah, and there were some significant changes, and as I said, I think that
Oh, Bezos was another one who didn't go against him.
that's right. He didn't. We talked about that on the other shows, and so these are kind of telltale signs. So you saw that the Zionist associated elites have not, that did not back down. They sort of insisted on him, and then you have like the technocrats who are more anti-Russia than the Zionists are. Which Keir Starmer in many ways is a symbol of. They uh, they lost in this. So I don't know. I find that very interesting how that's developed. Like again, we'll see how things we'll see how they go. Trump, of course, unlike last time, did not seem surprised to have won. He seems uh, more magnanimous than he was then, more confident, I would say. So there are differences. Of course, now the Dems are freed. Like, I mean, I support anybody who criticizes Israel, so I don't care if you're left or right wing. It doesn't. I don't care about that. I have two Palestinian friends, both Christians, and I'm with them. I'm on their side. I always will be. Um, just don't believe in the state of Israel. Sorry, if that pisses some listeners off.
I think
So
I think we've
so
drawn
now
our
the
lines
Dems
there.
are free now. They can criticize Trump like their hands are washed. Let's see what happens. Let's see. But just remember who stopped those protests at the universities. Of course, they were on Biden's watch, but it was the huge Jewish donors that made sure that stopped. And maybe in some other news that we should we should just briefly cover is the brawls in Brussels.
Oh, I forgot about those. That's
Yeah, yes, I never
but yeah,
forget.
we
So,
can we can we can take an aside, and I'll get back to the election stuff in just a moment. So you seem to have really been following it, so I'll just hand it over to you for that.
okay, so what happened was there was a soccer match. Of course, in the backdrop to all of this is the floods that have been going on in Spain, which we have not covered. Well, like over 220 confirmed dead, many more missing. Um, of course, some of the reasons this happened apparently is, Spain is trying to go green, so they blew up like 23 different dams. And this is probably the reason why there was flooding. Uh, in my estimation, when I found that out. But let's return to the soccer match that happened this week. So the Israelis already, which the news didn't reveal right away, the Israelis in Brussels before the match were already climbing up East Troughs and tearing down Palestinian flags from private residents, right? Um, During the match, they when there was a minute of silence for Spain, of course, Spain has been ardently against um, Israel and its genocide in Gaza. So some like it will not host various ships that are headed for Israel that are supplying munitions for their war effort. Of course, Morocco took over that duty, like total traitors. But this ties into what happened because um, there were other provocations. So these Jews, these Israeli Jews, were walking around Brussels during the night, even before the match, screaming like "Let us kill all the Arabs." I mean, they've wanted this ever since 9/11. This, you know what I'm talking about. So, anyways,
Oh, of course.
yeah, so um, there was a teenage video YouTuber who the soccer team is Tel Aviv Maccabi hooligans. So they did attack the police at one point, and uh, there is videos of this of them doing that. Again, a lot of this comes out late, and again, it was the gray zone who had the videos on this. So these guys were already misbehaved even before the match itself. But when the match started and the anthems were playing, they were disrespectful. But particularly when they asked for a minute of silence for the victims in Spain, the Jews began screaming, um, um, just being obnoxious, whistling, setting off firecrackers, anything to disturb the peace. Um, at the stadium and in the city, they were heard to say, the reason there are no the reason there are no Palestinians attending schools is we killed the children and the school and bombed the schools. Like, like we've seen this kind of gloating from them, right? Remember that over 238 Palestinians were murdered before the October 7th uprising by Hamas. So it's not necessarily unprovoked, okay? Um, anyways, so all of this was going on, and what happened was, and it was primarily the Moroccans. It was the Moroccan uh, based citizens in Brussels that started to chase these protesters down. One of them turned out to be like a former Mossad employee agent. Like I'm not saying this guy was like whatever, but they had his passport and um, they took screen caps of it. He was chased down and he was literally begging for his life. I'll give you money. I'll give you money. It's the only power we have. So, so and there's other examples where they're begging for their lives. Please, please. Like like 2 hours ago you're boasting about like killing children, and now like that you're being hunted down. MF, suffer, just suffer. Anyways, I thoroughly enjoyed that. That was hilarious. Now, of course, the um, Brussels is yet another place that's completely cucked to their interests, and they've made many arrests. Some of the news is not so distorted because there is a streak in Europe that is kind of anti-Israel. Like part of their left is kind of like that, and so like I'm sure there's no coverage at all in the States about this, or it's very one-sided. But they were intimidated, and apparently there's a match that they're supposed to play in Turkey, which has been canceled. I mean, the Turks will go even harder on them.
Oh
Like
yes.
you
I
have
was.
to you have to distinguish between the government and like the average individuals. Even the Moroccans who are in Spain and France, sorry, the Moroccans who are in Belgium and France hate their government for being total cucks, and that's why they did this. So I'm not saying everyone that pursued them was Moroccan, but it looks like most of them were, especially just based anecdotally on the video in the videos that I saw.
Oh yes, absolutely. And they'll come here to your streets, bring this behavior, and then when the rioting starts, of course, who are they going to pin the blame on? They're going to pin the blame on you, because that's what
Yeah,
always happens.
it's
And
literally Israel brought to Europe.
yes, that's exactly what what it is, and it's
Give us everything we want. We don't even want to pay for our own country. You have to support us
how many more reparations packages are you going to get from Germany? How long is this going to go on? And
forever.
yeah, forever. And this is how they treat you. This is what they expect from you, that you will give, 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 and there will never be any reward. There will never be any compensation. There will never be any benefit that comes to you because of this. And then their people will show up on your streets, act like third worlders, frankly, if we're, if we're being honest.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, you want to talk about third world? Let's look at the way Israelis behave in foreign countries. There's other cases of this. I think it was in Cyprus where the IDF were setting up the. Let's just say they would grab women off the streets, these off-duty
yeah,
IDF soldiers, and I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on what happened after that when they took them back to the hotels. So, like I
yeah.
said, they come here and they act like
They
the
don't just rape men.
no,
So just
no, it's everyone. It's everyone. They act like third worlders, and there's really no way around this. And they will come here, they will provoke ethnic tension, and then once again, as always, they will leave you to clean up the mess. And if you can complain about it, you're the bad guy. You're the evil one
yeah,
if you complain about this at all. And like I said, this country, particularly in its relationship to Europe, I always like to go back to Poland because I think Poland is one of those interesting examples where their ethnic resentment for the Poles, even with the government being fervently pro-Israel, has never subsided. I'm sure you all remember back in 2018 the whole Israeli social media campaign of Polish death camps, trying to claim that
oh
they
yeah,
were
yeah.
complicit. Um,
You can't
just
read.
earlier this year, I believe it was back in April, when the Israelis hit that one humanitarian aid convoy and killed a Polish citizen when their government demanded an explanation. Israel actually demanded Poland apologize for it. Um, and once again, Spain is one of those other countries where they have that animus because of certain events in 1492, and it always gets drawn back to the same place. And like I said, the most petty and resentful people I think in the world today, and
Yeah,
they'll come here and they will raise these tensions, and then, like I said, at the end they expect you to foot the bill for everything that they want and need.
that's right. 'Cause it's because they've been spoiled for so long that they think they can get away with this. That's the only reason why this is
And
happening.
sadly, they kind of can get away with it, as we've seen. There's a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
of places that will placate them, and it will continue. And of course, with the framing they have on the issue, well, if you go against Israel, then you must be aligned with the left wing. Can't have that. There's
Hmm.
no other reason why anyone would oppose Israel, and that's the framing that a lot of people have been trying to push. Like you can't go against that. Anti-Israel is anti-West, despite the fact that they come to the West and act like every other group. Like you
Yeah.
see, it is no different than what you get with some of the riots in the UK from the various groups there, whether they be of a Pakistani background, whether they be of an Indian background. It is the exact same behavior, maybe a little bit more coordinated, a little bit more organized, but that doesn't change a thing. Functionally they're doing the exact same thing, and they will continue to do it really until somebody says no. And what's the price for saying no? It is high, but it will continue until somebody says no. And I know a lot of people like to talk about, say, Israel's influence in Russia, but you'll notice that even with their Jewish population, they don't behave like that there.
Yeah.
That there's
No,
some
no,
sort
they can never do this,
no,
right?
no,
Like,
that there is some
never
sort of
forget,
rules.
Russia does not send aid to Israel. Russia aids Iran in Syria. Russia probably aids and has talks with Hamas and Hezbollah. I mean, we know that they do, including the forget the name of it, the Islamic group in Palestine. It's not Hamas. It could be
Is that
like
Palestinian Islamic Jihad?
that's it. And so like you can't compare them because like when America does that, then we can talk. Until you do that, just shut up, sit down.
But my ultimate point is that there are there are countries with diaspora where they would not dream of behaving like this.
Yeah,
In fact, Iran is actually another one that has a very significant
that's right.
diaspora population, and they would never dream of behaving like this. And
Which is
like
why I said spoiled.
yes, like with anyone, the more you placate them, the more they will behave like this. And like I said, it's a high price, but somebody just needs to say no. Just one time, just needs to say no. And look, a lot of people talk about, let's just say, things that I probably can't say on stream. I would be risking my channel if I did. But a lot of people like to talk about these things like, oh, that's the only way. But no, the only way, the simplest way to do this is just simply, no, you are in our country. You will behave by our rules, and I know you have cousins across the world if you don't like that. There's plenty of options for
That's right. That's right.
you. And it's really that simple. And even ignoring the Israel issue for a minute, I mean, look at the United States. Have they enjoyed a more comfortable existence in the history of their people than later 20th century America into 21st century America? Absolutely not. And what do they do? Are they grateful for that? Do they behave like any other group would? No, it's always more. It's always complaining. It's always whining. It's always we're the victim. It's never enough. You need to clamp down on stuff we don't like. We are immune to criticism. We can't have any of that. You can't talk about us like any other group. And that is just the way it's expected to be. And it's always more and more and more. They always push the envelope. They always push the limits. They never know when it's just good enough and when to just take it and when to just accept the very comfortable position that they have.
That's right. And what kills me is they said that they're sending the IDF special units to protect them because Israel has set up Jewish pogroms again. Like,
Remember the big scandal in
Like,
some parts of Europe where allegedly Chinese police were in European countries?
yeah,
Well, no,
like they've
this is just this in reality.
the only reason they can say stupid statements like this is like honestly, our governments are so pathetic. They've forced us to internalize to think about them before us every time.
I I don't know what else to say. So with that being said, I'm glad we had that aside. But I did have just a few other things on the election, so I'll put the map back up right here. And of course, like I said, we had it's not a landslide, but it was electorally a blowout that Kamala Harris significantly underperformed. And when it comes to the Democrats' response, I'm not going to sit here and just start rage farming. I'm not going to sit here and just go through bad takes. As fun as that might be, and I might do that at some point, but as fun as that might be, as expected, there was the 2 days of introspection before they went just back in the party line that Harris wasn't far left enough. That we need somebody who would double down on these principles. But again, when you want to talk about that kind of stuff, there's a reason while they may not have sided with Trump that the elite has made their peace with Trump because he is in many ways very convenient for them. He does offer that narrative shift. He does
Mhm.
offer an escape from the flatline corporate art world in a way, if that's how, if you're getting the picture I'm painting it against the let's just say sterile corporate speak leadership of America that somebody like Harris would have certainly provided the DMV America that somebody like Harris would have certainly created. That Trump does offer a reprieve from that. He does bring certain disaffected populations back into the fold. People who were probably have dropped out of society by now, if they haven't already, have made them feel, let's say, integrated again. And that, frankly, Trump will probably be able to do some. Uh, Trump will probably get a chance for his theatrics. I mean, look at it. You already have America's 250th anniversary coming up. He'll be allowed to put on the kind of celebration that say middle America would want, the very red, white, and
Mhm.
blue, not the like I said, like sterile, progressive version, for lack of a better word. And
People who
like
support rhinos.
yeah, yeah, but he will be able to, let's just say, optically put America back in the position where they can make the middle Americans, although they will certainly be far from the halls of power, make them feel like they're part of the system again. Because the past 20 years,
Yes.
they felt disaffected. At 20 plus years, they felt disaffected. But if Trump is allowed to, at least on the surface, do um, a quarter of what he wants to do, just to throw out a random figure, it will bring a lot of those people back in the fold. A lot of those people who they fear dropping out of society, once again, these most productive classes of society, and they'll have them at their disposal. Maybe they won't have the national attitude for, say, a conscription drive if war breaks out with Iran. I don't think it'd go that far. But point being is, it's going to reabsorb a lot of these people into the system and make them a lot more complacent against the issues, which are still going to be going on behind the scenes. It's just that Trump is going to be a nice cover up for it. I'm not saying that Trump is necessarily in on it, quote unquote, but he is part of it, whether he knows it or whether he's a willing participant or not, because of the way American politics is right now. But the question is, and as you had brought up, that the Democrats have free reign to really go in any direction that they want because of this frankly embarrassing defeat. And what will happen with that? What direction will they take? Will they actually have, let's say, the wherewithal to pivot on something like the Israel issue? I actually don't think so. I think that that's still going to be lockstep. That the Israeli influence over the elites has won out, and that is just something that is going to be part of American public life, despite popular opinion, despite public opinion, either being apathetic or anti-Israel more and more, and especially as the boomer generation does, uh, let's just be frank, die off. A lot of Israel's core support base in the United States will go with that. And I think that will also depend on what we see happen in the region right now. If Israel does
Hmm.
suffer some sort of embarrassing defeat, if, let's say, everything they've done does come back on them in the least favorable way possible, uh, when it comes to even a lot of the people who support Israel in America for, say, the religious reasons, it could create a crisis of conscience in that regard, where Israel was supposed to be this invincible state, this chosen state that overcomes all odds. Why is it losing? So we could see something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I think that's a very good comparison because I think it also, like, I can use that as a comparison with like this, with what is happening, or what happened, or the election revealed in the States. Okay, so one of the reasons why Trump won is because they did have 4 years of Biden. Biden was supposed to bring in normalcy. It was 4 years of constant, like, street fights, and people wanted stability. They were sick of it, and along comes Biden, and his presidency will be looked at as a disaster. He supported a genocide in Palestine. He opened a useless war that killed, we don't even know how many people, but hundreds of thousands is not unlikely.
Yes, the largest industrial war since the end of World War II. Just simply
Right. And
enough.
yes. And so he will be looked as a complete disaster. And one of the reasons, of course, why Kamala Harris couldn't get reelected is the Biden administration just had a very poor performance. Now, there's other reasons that we've already covered about. There's a struggle between different elites within, Western society, and we know which one won out. But um, by the same token, you you couldn't rig another 2020. First of all, the opportunities weren't there. So that conjunction that we had in 2020 of the Floyd riots plus COVID, right? Nothing like that popped up in 2024. And it couldn't pop up because it would be even harder to believe a false flag like that, like the kind that we had in 2020. I think even some shit libs understand that that was just all fake. They
Oh
they
yeah,
agree with what
absolutely.
happened. They'll never admit it to their enemies, but they're glad it happened, right? Uh,
And I do think on that point, a lot of the protest energy was in something that was decidedly against the left, where it was into the pro-Palestine protests that were happening from October 7th onwards, where it because the right, of course, they weren't going to support it. They were going to file in behind Israel, but it created an irreconcilable rift within the left, and
yes,
that's where the protest energy was. It wasn't against whatever uh, regime talking point it was, whether that be the BLM, the Antifa stuff. It was focused towards, let's just say, one of the sacred cows, and
that's right.
that harmed the left because there were plenty on the left to support that sacred cow. They couldn't pick a narrative, and they couldn't rein in these protesters. So in that way, it broke them, and it did lead to a lot of elite defections, where these people who previously despised Trump realized that, oh hey, maybe he supports our pet issue, so we'll rally around him.
And this is why, like, as I said, they couldn't create another stupid false flag for the 2024 election. And that's what it would take. It would take another ridiculous false flag to get America fully involved in a war in the Middle East. Like, as we've said on this show repeatedly, as you've stated, as I've stated, there is no significant uptick in military industrialization by the US to get involved either in Iran or, let's say, sorry, yeah, against Iran or Ukraine. So if they were going to react, it would be something swift. It would be potentially nuclear, um, but it would not. But even then, they that might bring them too much ire from the rest of the world. I mean, everything would change after that. Um, so I don't, and I'm glad you brought up the times that Trump has frustrated Netanyahu. Um, it might prove just as much the same this time because he recognized the Golan Heights. He moved the American embassy to Jerusalem because he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel instead of Tel Aviv. But a lot of that, I think, it was him bargaining for not doing more in Syria.
Oh, I agree
It,
that
it was
he had.
just giving Netanyahu, some bones here and there that were important to him. But you can tell this time around Israeli Jews expect a lot more. And it was Gallant or Gantz that was recently fired. It was Gallant,
Gallant
right?
was dismissed the day after the election.
Yes, so he was dismissed. So now they're bringing in another guy. I mean, they're all hardliners, but Gallant was criticized for I mean, he's a butcher anyways, but he was criticized. He criticized Netanyahu for not negotiating for the release of the hostages. Of course, Netanyahu has never cared about releasing the hostages. Not really. He will always need a certain amount. And, some hostages, like I remember in the 80s, there were hostages that it might have been Hezbollah that they took. And, for countless years. I keep forgetting there was a guy from Buffalo he might have died there. It's so long ago for me, right? I mean, it's over 34, 36 years ago. It's hard to recall. But in any case, Netanyahu, so he was fired basically for criticizing Netanyahu, the feeling that, they were not prepared to fully do what they needed to do in Lebanon. Now, a few days ago, they destroyed a house like with 20 people, like a large complex in Lebanon, three of them children. Like all that bombing is still taking place. They're bombing Syria as well, right in downtown Damascus. So it's not the airport like they usually bomb from time to time. Um, the I think he, I think Netanyahu believes that Trump will give more than Biden did or could, and that, of course, that's the whole reason for wrapping up the war in Ukraine,
Well,
is to give Israel everything it needs to expand its power in the Middle East.
I think another question worth exploring is what are Netanyahu's prospects right now? How much longer can he hold on to power? Will he be able to really stretch this out through the war? Will there be some sort of internal revolt against him among his own cabinet, among the IDF? Because he's burned almost every bridge he's had. And it does seem like Washington, especially under Trump, is going to be his last lifeline. And the question is he going to be able to make enough overtures to Trump to have him stay in power? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a real question. Or would Trump, I don't know, maybe via the State Department or via somebody else, be able to convince him to, of course, not drop support for Israel, but drop support for Netanyahu and shift that towards even somebody else within the Likud party and put them in
Yeah.
power who will probably continue the war to some degree, but doesn't have the same stains on them as Netanyahu does. And I do think that is a question worth exploring, and I think that will depend on what we get from the preliminary talks between them. Now, I know that Trump has spoken with Orban, that, of course, allegedly he spoke with Putin, even though Peskov denies it.
Yeah.
But he has not spoken with Netanyahu, to my knowledge, yet. That has not
Mm-hmm.
happened.
Mm-hmm.
And what is their
Interesting.
first conversation going to look like, either before he comes into office or after he comes into office? And I think that will really set the tone for American-Israeli relations under Trump. How much, because of course he's going to back them. There's always going to be that baseline of support. But how much is he going to back them, and what ways is he going to back them, and what's his personal relationship with Netanyahu going to look like after these 4 years have passed? And will he be able to? Will Netanyahu be able to keep Trump on his good side in order to keep the status quo? Because Netanyahu, of course, wants the status quo of just this slowly escalating war until things eventually work out for Israel. Is he going to be able to convince Trump to go along with that, or will Trump have some sort of more restrained plan? But like you said, there's a lot of people Trump owes favors to, especially in light of his reelection with the way things realigned, and they're expecting a lot for Israel. And will he be able to secure that? Will he be able to work with Netanyahu or whoever replaces him in order to secure that? And frankly, this might be a little out there, but I do think if we see another impeachment or regime change attempt against Trump, it is going to be because whether out of, I don't know, maybe some personal politics or just the circumstance at hand, that he underperforms for Israel. Therefore, they will find something that they have to press him on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, it'll be interesting to watch if what if Trump doesn't come through for Netanyahu? How will he punish him? That's one thing I'm trying to figure out. Now, Trump, I mean, it's arguable whether you could say he has a clean record. Everybody knows some of his escapades, his sins that he has committed in the past. And of course, the plethora of accusations every time he's run for office of the R word that almost never pan out at all. They're all disappearing. So, does Netanyahu actually have any dirt on Trump? Would he be willing to fabricate something about ties to Russia if he doesn't come through? I don't know. Like I say, he's I think if there was any really big dirt on Trump, it's either negated because he was only doing what Dems were doing, like Epstein Island, say for instance. By the way, I do not think that Trump went there dozens of times and like Bill. Uh, I don't know the full extent of it. Also, to be honest, but let's say that might be an angle. The thing is he was never as deeply entrenched as some of these other figures that he, frankly, has been embattled with for almost a decade now. So I don't know. Um,
Well, maybe the
how will
sweetheart
Trump come
deal.
through though? Like,
Maybe the sweetheart deal he has for Netanyahu is room and board at Mar-a-Lago. That's his departure deal. They let somebody else come to power in Israel, bear all the consequences. Netanyahu will be immune from prosecution. Him and his wife, they can come live in some Florida condo and work for some NGO, and maybe they can even be neighbors with Zelensky if it gets that bad.
yeah, yeah.
But in all seriousness, like tongue-in-cheek comments aside, if things really do go south for Netanyahu, once again, he is a dual citizen of the United States. That he will come here, and that Trump probably will let him stay, and that he
Oh
will
yeah.
not touch him, not extradite him, and that Netanyahu will get to have the golden parachute retirement that he's always aimed for. And I don't know, maybe they put somebody like Lieberman back in power. I don't know
Hmm.
if he would be a candidate for that, or because I don't think Ben Gvir and Smotrich have the ability to be the face of the operation, so to speak. They always have to be on the sidelines just because of how radical they are. But it will be interesting to see how the dynamics between Trump and Netanyahu play out, and particularly what the Democratic response to it is, whether they fall in line. Because I know that Trump was already offering to pay off the campaign debts of the Democratic Party. Now we'll see if something like that actually comes through, but
Yeah.
I I don't believe it will happen. But it would be funny if at least they had the media narrative of the Democrats are in Trump's pocket too. But point
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
is, I don't think the Democratic establishment is going to break with Trump over the Netanyahu issue or over the Israel issue. They might, I don't know, push back a little, but they're not going to, let's just say, embrace the line of the pro-Palestinian activists.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I don't have much more to add on to that.
I think there's just one last thing I need
Hmm.
to show before we either move on or end the program, because I do feel like we've covered most everything there was to say. It was a strange episode because a lot of it was going to be dominated by election talk. Of course, we had some stuff about Ukraine. But I just need to go ahead and put this on screen. It's just, and I'll send it to you so you know what I'm referring to. But
Okay.
it is interesting to look back now that the election has concluded. What um, what they tried to push here. So let me just save this. Uh, I can't get. You're gonna lose it when I send this to you.
Oh my God. Okay.
Um, okay, I'm sending it to you right now, and then I'll get it on the screen.
Okay. Hang on.
So there's that for you, and I'll put it up for our wonderful audience.
Oh my God. Her moment. Oh yeah. Can she win? That was one of the interesting things. There were too many headlines that were asking, "Can she win?" Which is almost an admonition is that she won't win.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is, but it's one of those just
Camilla
like
Ott? What the? Oh, is that the coconut thing? You just jumping out a
yeah.
coconut tree? Like, oh my God, she said coconut tree. That's so relatable.
Ugh. And I might be revealing my age here, and this might be a little beyond you because I don't know how much a gamer you are. But whenever they brought up the coconut thing, all I could think of was the Donkey Kong rap from
Oh yeah, yeah,
DK64.
yeah, yeah. My brother's a big gamer, not me though.
But
It's
yeah,
it's one of the reasons why our nephews, he became their favorite uncle, and I cannot tell you how sidelined I was.
oh, I can only imagine. You must feel more sidelined than Kamala Harris.
I am.
All these images, like I know it's not going to happen. I know that some things are just too entrenched, but if only Donald Trump can put an end to this kind of art style. And well, I mean that Vogue one, that one in the bottom left corner, did they just Photoshop her onto a man? That's what it looks like.
Yes.
I like how sad she looks in the "Can't She Win" one though. That's funny because no, she cannot win. But yeah, just I suppose the final question is: do you think we'll ever see her again? Do you think she'll ever be brazen enough to run for office again?
No, it's over.
Yeah,
Like, remember we talked about, like, why isn't Gavin Newsom running? It's because, like, he can't right now.
yeah, they don't
He's
want to
he's
tarnish the
following a
reputation.
horrible presidency,
Yeah,
right? Everybody knows, like, he's not in friendly competition with the Harris admin in order to carry the Democrats. Like, he's subservient, but he's also thinking about his career. Um, I have a feeling he's going to run in 2028, but he's not going to run. He. I mean, technically, he could have, right? Biden could have bowed out.
oh
I mean,
yeah,
he's an idiot as well. Biden should have bowed out. Like, he's transitional, but not that transitional.
yeah. They should have
Um,
let the Democrats have an actual primary. Biden says he's not going to run again, and their chances would have been much better.
yeah, yes. So, yeah. So, when I saw that, like, there just wasn't the. I mean, there were people who backed her who believed she could win, like, you know, but they're not important people, right? Like, yes, they're important. They're more important than us. We understand that. Um, so I would say that things could have been done for a Democrat to be in the presidential Oval Office, inaugurated a new person in 2025, and they did not take those steps, and therefore, Kamala's never going to try this again. Really, there was a moment of uncertainty that followed the two assassination attempts, even the first assassination attempt, where it looked like she was spiking back up. But now we know that, like, a lot of the polls are rigged. They're just there to persuade you to vote a certain way, or maybe not vote at all. And like, again, if they really, really wanted this, they could have. Um, but they didn't, and they couldn't. And part of it is, the people, a lot of people at the top, the American elites, thought, like, we can't have, like, just bring him back because there's just too much to lose. I mean, to a certain extent, he's a known quantity now. He's been familiarized. We need restoration of faith in our institutions again. Um, and he can do that, even if it comes at the risk of normalizing that the 2020 election was stolen. The only thing that's going to happen there is, in the future, Republicans will always believe the 2020 election was stolen, and Dems will always believe the 2024 elections were stolen.
And 2000.
Which, yeah, 2000, yeah. So, like, yeah, so, like, that's right. I mean, I don't care. Whatever.
I'm the most stalwart
But that's
defender of
what'll
democracy. I
happen.
won't have this. But I do want to bring up one thing because you brought up Newsom. He's already beginning his bluster, saying California is going to withhold its funds to the
Yeah,
federal
yeah,
government to the tune of 235 billion. Won't happen. He's just trying to make a name for himself even more than he already
yep.
has. But you did tell me one last thing that I think is good to close on, especially
Hmm.
in relation to election news. And that is right here. The Ukrainian surrender rate has increased 8 times since Trump's victory. In the period of November 6th to November 11th, an eightfold increase in the number of cases of surrender of the AFU servicemen was recorded compared to statistics from before November 5th. Now, it will be interesting to see those over a longer term, especially as Trump is leading up into coming into office. Yeah, like I said, that's going to be interesting to keep our eye on for the time being. But I think that will depend on a lot of Trump's rhetoric and what really happens in regard to the Ukraine issue, which ways it feels like the wind is blowing. But this might just be the straw that breaks the camel's back when it comes to morale among a lot of AFU. The fact that the burnt effigies of Trump didn't work.
Yeah, that's right. That's Donald Trump. Yes. Just I love the way they talk. It just kills me. Um,
They tapped
they did
into
another
the.
one. They took a mannequin. They took
Go
a
ahead.
mannequin and dressed it up with a MAGA hat and a America First T-shirt, but no pants. I even think it could be just Russians doing it, but in any case, they're firing at it with two AK-47s, and then you can see on the ground that there is a wet trail that is discolored the sand. It's gas. They light it on fire, and like literally in the movies, the fire spreads and goes toward the mannequin, and it goes up in flames, and F Trump and all this kind of stuff in Ukrainian. It's just
I'm glad that the resistards have found a new audience.
yeah.
But yeah, even the darkest of most debased ancient Slavic pagan practices could not curse Trump. Who would have thought? What a wonderful crop of people that we're supporting. I feel represented. These are the most stalwart defenders of European civilization. I'm glad that my safety is in their hands.
One more thing.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Mark Rutte has threatened that if Trump doesn't support Ukraine or offers a horrible peace deal, he will kick America out of NATO. It's
Do it.
like
Do it. Please.
you talk about Gavin Newsom being all blustered. This is hilarious.
I've never asked for anything as much I've asked for this.
He's never going to do it. How do you? It's an American organization. How are you going to do this,
No,
dude?
it's just not going to happen. But
Yeah.
it would be probably the funniest thing after kicking Turkey out of NATO. It's just not going to happen.
Yes.
We'll just build our own European army. We'll defend Western civilization
Yeah,
against
yeah.
both sides, against both our eastern and western flanks. Yeah, okay,
Mhm.
sure, Mark, sure. Not even office for what 2 months and already makes Stoltenberg look like a refined genius.
I know. I
How do you
know.
do it? How do you do
Yeah.
it? But that is all I had.
Yeah. That's all I have too.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning into this very traumatizing stream. I know that we're all still trying to process the victory of Donald Trump and the victory of hate and bigotry in this country, and the fact that the American people once again refused to pick a qualified woman of color over a felon. And you know what? There might not be any future war reports. This might be enough just to break my spirits and not come back. But if we do, if we do, you know where to find us.
Yeah. Yeah. We're
So
we're heartbroken.
yes.
Bye, everybody.
So thank you everyone for tuning into this, of course, very bleak episode of the War Report. And you know what? I'm still riding with Biden. That's ultimately where I end. Okay,
It's the
I
aviator sunglasses. You
okay.
can't.
Look, he came out. He came out at the election. He showed he was coherent. He put to rest all of his critics, and America still betrayed this man. And I don't think I can abide by that. We are still riding with Biden here on the War Report. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.
Goodbye and take care.